what is shamanism and who is the shaman? These are quite controversial questions and long debated ones that we are going to answer in today's video, so stay tuned if you want to find out. Hello everyone, I'm Angela and welcome back to my channel. Before we start today's video, I have to make two premises. So the first one is that, of course, the academic literature that I'm going to address in today's video is not comprehensive of everything there is. So I strongly encourage you to do your own research and make up your own mind regarding the conceptualization of shamanism. The second premise is that I'm afraid that I'm going to butcher a few names and terms in this video, so yeah, just check out the screen and I will put everything spelled out for you so that you know how to look them up. This video will be articulated in three sections. The first one discussing the history of the term, so how the term shamanism came to be. The second one discussing the evolution of the use of the term and the controversy surrounding it. And the third part will be about a solution, or rather a new way of understanding and conceptualizing shamanism, which is my personal take on how to interpret existing literature and how to move forward. The first accounts of the terms shamanism and shaman come from Russian ethnography from the 19th century, where the term shaman and shamanism were used in reference to a specific group of people from one region of Siberia, which is the Tungusi region. And that is why you will find that scholars pronounce it shamanism rather than shamanism, because the term shamanism comes from is the Tungusi term shaman. So shamanism sounds somewhat closer to the origin where the term comes from. Mikhailovsky says that the term shaman is found among the Tungusis, the Buryats and the Yakuts. Viktor Mikhailovsky uses the word shaman in reference to a person who is the intermediary between the human and the spirit world. He says that the term is found and used among the Tungusis, the Buryats and the Yakuts. And although the Buryats and the Yakuts use the term, they also have their own terms for their shamans. So the term itself is the only term used by the Tungusis to refer to their shamans. The most influential definition of shamanism comes from Mircea Eliade. Mircea Eliade is the one who says that shamanism is the mastery of the techniques of ecstasy. So the shaman is the person who is able to enter an altered state of consciousness. And since Mircea Eliade describes this as a set of techniques, this set the stage for many scholars and many practitioners to think and believe that shamanism is not a religion but a set of techniques that can be practiced alongside other, we may say even any other religious belief. So basically the term shamanism was invented by Western scholars, and since there's been a long debate regarding what are the limits of shamanism, so what can fall under the umbrella of shamanism and what cannot, I find it interesting that the historian Ronald Hutton wrote that the only common factor in the study of shamanism is Western scholarship. For he created the term, produced the studies that extended its meaning, while also generating interest for the topic within the practicing communities. And in the process, it has made the term into a label with absolutely no agreed on meaning. So Hutton concludes that in this regard, the ivory tower has become the Tower of Babel, because in reality, every so-called shamanic tradition across the world has their own terms for their shamans, for these people who enter in contact with the spirit worlds and take care of the community or heal people. So the issue that has arisen is that The fact that more and more local traditional shamans have been using the word, overlapping the local term, has created the illusion somehow that there is a consistent, coherent movement which is just one consistent thing. Having such a malleable and undefined semantics, shamanism has been understood in a different way depending on the time and age it was being absorbed into. From the Enlightenment view of the shaman as a charlatan to the positivist belief that shamanism represented an archaic religious form belonging to primitive peoples, the term has been constantly shaped and reshaped by the times and cultures that adopted it. For example, in the 20th century, psychopathological interpretations emerged, deeming the shamanic experience a form of illness, specifically hysteria or epilepsy. And that's why Eliade's work really represented the turning point in the understanding of shamanism, for basically he turned the shaman into a mystical figure who is able to create a contact with the spirit world and gain powers from it. So the aforementioned issues beg the question, is there really anything that all the different forms of shamanism have in common? Does shamanism have common traits across the different manifestations that we find? Margaret Stattley summarizes the main traits that we find across the different forms of shamanism as follows. The first one is the belief in the existence of the world of spirits, with which the shaman is in contact and he's able to cooperate with these spirits to help and benefit the community. The second trait would be the inducing of trance, so entering an altered state of consciousness, often by ecstatic singing or drumming or dancing, and that is when the shaman's spirit exits his body or her body and enters the spirit world. The third trait is that the shaman cures illnesses, especially those of psychosomatic nature. And also the shaman helps the members of the community to overcome various issues that they might encounter. Another aspect that we find across different forms of shamanism is animism, which is basically the belief that everything in the world has a spirit, and that the world is populated by, as Graham Harvey calls them, other than human people. And the shaman is able to establish relationships with these other than human people that populate basically everything that exists. Things, objects, animals, every single thing in nature and in the reality that the shaman or the non-shaman experience. So even an illness, for example, would have a spirit. So how can we understand shamanism then, since we have all these various interpretations of what it is and what are the main traits of shamanism? I find it very interesting what Cacopardo wrote, which is that in order to understand shamanism, we should make the same distinction that anthropologists make between structure and process. And we should understand shamanism as a process rather than a structure, as something that has a certain fluidity for its own nature. I personally developed a new approach to the understanding of shamanism, which is twofold basically. So I adopt a combination of two methodologies. The first one is adopting a local specific understanding. And this comes a bit from the idea of provincializing God by Michael Lambeck and the idea of a deictic approach by Bettina Schmidt. Bettina Schmidt describes deixis as basically as a linguistic term that highlights the problem that the meaning of certain words is strongly dependent on their context. So there are certain words that don't have an inherent meaning, but they only acquire a meaning when they are attached to a specific context. And here and there are examples of this, because of course here doesn't make any sense unless you relate it to a place. And also Bettina Schmidt talks about the the deictic approach when it comes to the conceptualization of spirit possession, I argue that it might actually be very interesting for the understanding of shamanism as well. So since shamanism has been around for many years, for centuries, and has been practiced around the world, and the term itself, the concept of shamanism, only arose because Western scholarship created it, creating the illusion that there is this consistent movement across the world, then the issue of whether you fit into the category of shamanism was born. But actually, shamanism was there before this concept. I argue that shamanism is to be understood as a deictic term, as a term that only gains meaning in reference to the context it's applied to. And second, I think that adopting discourse analysis would really benefit the understanding of shamanism, especially when studying it as an anthropologist or an ethnographer who goes there and does field work with people as I do in my research. Discourse analysis comes from Foucault, challenges the idea that words are merely descriptive, to say that language actually shapes the word and the views that we have of it. So what does it mean to understand shamanism using discourse analysis? It means that shamanism becomes an empty signifier, in the sense that it is historically, socially, and culturally negotiated over and over, depending on the context and how the people view it, understand it, and talk about it. So what I think after 3 years of research, field research, and of course on academic scholarship on the topic, is that although there are still controversies and misunderstandings, or people disagreeing on the meaning of shamanism and what constitutes shamanism and what doesn't constitute shamanism, I think that shamanism as a term is still very useful, because you do find people all around the world that use the term shamanism and understand what it means. That if you're practicing shamanism, you are believing in a world of spirit, you are entering this spirit world, whether you call it non-ordinary reality or whether you call it the shamanic state of consciousness. So there may be different ways of perceiving it, but there's still this belief that you are entering a different realm of reality or a different state of consciousness that allows you to speak and enter in contact with these spirits. And from this contact you gain power and knowledge, as they say in different forms of neo-shamanism, for example. We will talk about neo-shamanism in a future video, by the way. So I think that it's not really up to the scholars to decide what is shamanism and who is really a shaman, and as opposed to somebody who's not a shaman. If a person is using the word shaman and referring to their practice as shamanism, I believe that the role of the scholar is to understand what kind of reality and what kind of understanding they are constructing behind the word shaman and shamanism. What is the meaning that they associate with that word, and what is the reality that that word is creating in their own lives. So while you have these two main tendencies, so one that says only Siberian Tungusis can be considered shamans, you also have the other tendency that expands the term without any boundaries of any sort. I would argue that there might be a way of narrowing down the use of the term, which need to be context sensitive and discourse led. Basically, the role of the scholar in this sense is not really to tell the practitioner you are a shaman or you are not a shaman, but rather to identify the patterns that emerge from the community that uses the term in their narratives, how those terms are used and how they become meaningful in the narratives that the community creates. Because despite how difficult it is to define shamanism, the reality of its existence is there. and it is a movement that is becoming increasingly popular. It certainly is in Italy, where my fieldwork is based, but I can see from the experiences of my colleagues around the world that it's not just in Italy. So it is an increasingly popular practice, and more people are using this term and debating this term. So what really matters are the semantic patterns, the patterns of meaning that are created within one specific community in a specific place, and how these patterns of meaning enter the narratives whereby the practitioners understand what shamanism is. I hope that makes sense. So more interesting questions would be, what are the shared premises underlying the different narratives that practitioners create around the word shamanism? And what is the reality created by these competing yet similar narratives? Because although there are people who are fighting over what shamanism or true shamanism or real shamanism is, when they are talking about shamanism, they are still understanding each other. So what are the underlying premises to this common understanding, which goes beyond the conflicting ideas over what shamanism is? So hope you enjoyed this brief overview of what shamanism is and what is a shaman. And let me know what you think about my methodological solution to maybe better understand shamanism in the contemporary world. So let me know what you think in the comment section down below. And if you have any questions or doubts, do leave them and I will gladly answer all your questions. So if you like this video, smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, and stay tuned for all the academic fun. Bye for now.